In this heart-wrenching based story, a lonely man meets a woman whose pain runs deeper than he could ever imagine. What starts as a transaction turns into a journey of truth, healing, and redemption. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. The rain drummed softly against the wide glass windows of the downtown New Orleans hotel, blurring the city lights into a watercolor of gold and blue. Inside, Ethan Cole sat in silence, his fingers tracing the rim of his untouched glass of whiskey. The night had stretched long, thick with the kind of loneliness that money couldn't fix. He was a man who had everything: wealth, a name, a reputation that opened doors. Yet tonight, he had paid for company. Not for love, not even for desire, but for distraction. When the door finally opened, she walked in quietly, Mara Lane, her presence delicate, yet heavy with something unseen. She was beautiful, not in the way magazines describe beauty, but in the way broken things sometimes are. Quietly tragic. Mara's voice trembled when she greeted him, her eyes avoiding his. She sat across from him, clutching the edge of the table like a woman bracing for something painful. Ethan noticed the small details: the slight shake in her hands, the tired curve of her lips, the way her eyes darted toward the window whenever silence filled the air. He wanted to say something kind, something human, but the words caught in his throat. "You don't have to pretend," he finally murmured. "We can just talk if you'd like." Her laugh was quiet, bitter, like someone who had forgotten what sincerity sounded like. "You paid for me," she whispered, her tone trembling between defiance and sorrow. "Now finish it." Ethan froze. There was no anger in her voice, only resignation. It wasn't a demand. It was a surrender. The words struck deeper than he expected, slicing through the shallow intentions he had walked in with. For the first time that night, he truly looked at her. Not at her face, not at her body, but at the grief behind her silence. "You don't want this," he said softly. Her eyes glistened. "Want?" she echoed almost to herself. "I stopped wanting things a long time ago." A tear slid down her cheek, and Ethan's chest tightened. He couldn't reach out, not because he didn't want to, but because touching her felt like touching a wound he didn't deserve to heal. The clock ticked in the background, each second heavier than the last. Outside, thunder rolled over the Mississippi, and somewhere in the distance, a jazz tune echoed through the rain. Ethan leaned back, unsure what to do with the aching empathy crawling through his chest. "Who hurt you, Mara?" he asked quietly. She didn't look at him this time. She stared out the window, her reflection merging with the city lights, her tears catching the glow. "Everyone who promised not to," she whispered. And in that moment, Ethan realized he hadn't bought a night. He had stumbled into someone's unfinished story, and it was far more than he had bargained for. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her. Days passed, but Mara's words haunted him like an unfinished song. Everyone who promised not to. They echoed through his mind every time he looked at the empty side of his bed, every time the rain returned. He tried to lose himself in his work, in the clean lines of his architectural blueprints, but nothing erased her face from his thoughts. Those tired eyes that carried more weight than a lifetime should. He knew he wasn't supposed to look for her again. It wasn't part of the deal, but there are some encounters that refuse to fade, and Mara Lane had become one of them. A week later, while driving through the French Quarter, Ethan's car slowed near a community shelter. He wasn't sure why, but something, a familiar voice maybe, made him stop. Through the drizzle, he saw her. Mara, wearing a worn gray hoodie, was serving soup to a line of homeless men and women. No makeup, no pretense, just her, raw and human. He stood by the doorway for a long time before walking in. When she noticed him, her hands froze mid-motion, the ladle trembling above the pot. For a heartbeat, she looked terrified. Then slowly, she smiled. Small, uncertain, but real. "You came back," she whispered, almost like she didn't believe it herself. "I never really left," Ethan replied quietly. They talked after, her shift sitting on the back steps of the shelter where the city hummed in the distance. She told him about the nights she had nowhere to go, about debts and broken promises, and the people who made her believe she was worth nothing more than what she could sell. Ethan listened, not as a savior, but as someone who finally understood that some wounds can't be fixed, only held. When her voice broke, he didn't interrupt. He let her cry, each tear carving truth into the night air. And in that silence, something in both of them began to heal. As the moonlight stretched across the wet pavement, Ethan looked at her. Really looked, and realized that what he had once paid for was never meant to be bought. Beneath her tears, he found a strength that shattered him. A quiet reminder that love isn't about rescuing someone. It's about standing beside them until they remember how to rescue themselves. Sometimes, two broken souls don't fix each other. They simply remind one another that they were never unworthy of being whole.